Good Friday, everybody. See what I did there? Welcome to SCP Cafe, Week 16 Recap Show. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, clone aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter, part-time destroyer of worlds. How are you? I think I have a good show lined up today. There was some really interesting stuff this week. I only have a couple of things before I get into it. I had a question come in sort of out of the blue on the wiki, on the cafe chat, I should say. Got a private message on IRC from a user asking about Patreon. And I'm gonna be honest, I hadn't made any decisions on the topic, but they wanted to know if I had one or if I was considering having one for SCP Cafe so they could support me. And I really appreciate the sentiment, first off. The thing is, with Patreon, you do need to provide exclusive content for that crowd. Right now, I really don't have any plans for what that extra content would be or what I would really do. Now, that said, I've been a member of Patreon as a creator, is the term they use, for a while for other projects. And I actually got an email from them earlier this week indicating that they are upping their the cut that they take starting here in a couple of weeks. So if I'm going to do this, I actually need to get started on something fairly soon, like within the next 3 weeks, I want to say. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but I'm not 100% clear on what that bonus content would really look like. I'm open to suggestions here. Let me know your thoughts on this, either in the chat or you can send an email to mailbag@scp.cafe and let me know your thoughts. Like I said, haven't made my mind up on it one way or another. I do like the flexibility right now that I basically have about 2 hours a week that I work on the pod, and then, anytime I have an order come in on the store, that's usually a couple of hours taken up. So the time commitment is flexible, which I appreciate because there's enough other stuff going on. But I'm not ruling it out. I don't have an idea, but I'm not ruling it out. So let me know your thoughts. I'd appreciate that. That's about all. It was on my mind today. Nothing else terribly notable. I'm really close to 100 subscribers on YouTube. That does unlock some goodies for me. If you have been listening and want to do me a favor, if you just subscribe to it on YouTube to get me to 100 so I can unlock some of these features, that would be much appreciated, actually. Outside of that, not a lot else as far as site news this week, so we are going to jump right in. There were 19 skips that survived up to my selection point, 16 of them still in the positives and thus in scope to be reviewed. I have 5 of them plus a long boy, so we are going to kick things off with SCP-4155, titled Soft Serve Kittens, written by Schumacher. Now, this is the second in 2 weeks from Schumacher. They also wrote SCP-4122, the second long pipe, which I covered last week. So from a first-time writer, covering them twice in 2 weeks, I think that's pretty cool. We have an image of I believe a Sphinx cat, a hairless cat. I never had to deliver any cats, so I don't know if they were all this naked and wrinkly looking, but I don't think so. In addition, this cat appears to be missing its eyes. It looks like a kitten to me, but according to the caption, this is an adult specimen of SCP-4155, and I quote, shortly after harvesting. It's an interesting word. We have an object class of Euclid and a fairly long procedures here, 3 paragraphs of them. We've erected a site around the natural habitat of 47 specimens of 4155, and this is to monitor the population's health and restrict civilian access. This is done to ensure that we can support a viable breeding population, as they will not breed in captivity. We will perform health checkups on them, anonymous donations to conservation efforts, and the breeding of tricolored bats in captivity to bolster the falling number of wild bats in the Chicago area. Kind of odd. Additionally, this indicates that the -1 may not be impeded in its monthly routine without written permission from at least a level 4 personnel, and an area along the north boundary of the site has been excluded from surveillance to better facilitate the -1's activities. So a fair amount going on in these procedures, and none of it really explained, and that's all fine up to this point in the work. 4155 is described as an eyeless, furless variety of cat native to a small limestone cave system located on the outskirts of Chicago, and all members of 4155 have abnormally elongated limbs, partial albinism, and severe neoteny, which is footnoted where adult members of the variety retain a juvenile form. Specimens of 4155 continually secrete a white substance through the pores of their skin, and chemical analysis reveals this to be near identical to the soft serve ice cream sold by several major fast food franchises. And these secretions will gradually build up over the course of a month to a thickness of approximately 2 centimeters in locations that would correspond to fur on non-anomalous kittens. So, what was the name of this? Soft serve kittens. What do we have? Kittens that secrete soft serve. Got it. We'll keep going. It goes on to say that the production of this substance is entirely anomalous, as vivisection, yikes, has found nothing unusual in the skip's physiology, and its diet does not include the requisite carbohydrates to produce the quantity of sugar found in the secretions. The skip feeds primarily on the tricolored bat colony within the cave system with which it shares the habitat. It's an ambush predator. It clings to the ceiling and grabs the bats when they return to roost, and we have noted that the odor of the secretions is observed to be of interest to the bats, so this may be an evolved strategy to hunt prey. Now, we also describe a -1, a male humanoid generally between 15 and 20 years of age, wearing a red and yellow Ronald McDonald costume, and on the 7th day of each month, an instance of -1 will manifest in an unobserved location within the vicinity of the site, carrying a plastic bucket and a stainless steel dessert spatula. The -1 will then proceed to the cave and collect the secretions from each member of 4155, removing these secretions from their skin with the spatula and depositing it into the bucket. And after it has harvested each member of the population, it exits the cave and demanifests. That's a lot to process here. Let's keep going. We have an addendum. It's an interview log between one of these -1s and a Foundation doctor. The -1 identifies themselves as Ronnie MacArthur, and that they do work for McDonald's as a summer job. And when we ask what they are doing in the cave, they respond, harvesting the ice cream. And we say, for what purpose? And he goes, what do you mean purpose? It's ice cream. Someone's gotta. They'd have to sell the substitute if we didn't. Substitute? Yeah, you don't want to know where that comes from. Look, I appreciate the interest and all, but if I'm not in trouble, I should really get going. My bucket's only half full, and they're going to dock my pay if I'm late. We asked him about the, how did they get here? Said, well, I've got a car just outside. They're in the cave. Said, we haven't seen any vehicle. And they go, well, yeah, it's outside. And we ask, more for my own curiosity than anything, why the get-up, as they are wearing a Ronald McDonald outfit. And they go, damn it, do you have to mention it? It's embarrassing enough they make me wear this without people drawing attention to it. But why, though? I don't know. It's just what they make us wear. I see. I apologize for embarrassing you, Mr. MacArthur. Thank you for your time. Security, please escort SCP-4155-1 to the holding facility. That's where we end the log. So we do this on 7/5/1998. This is another one of these wonky date formats where the month and day are ambiguous. I'll keep hammering this home. I want people to hear it, and I want them to do it. 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. This is either 2-digit day dash 2-digit month or 2-digit month dash 2-digit day dash 4-digit year. Don't do this. In any event, we have a second addendum, which is a containment breach. After we escorted this -1 to a holding facility and detained them within about a week, we have our first reported case of McDonald's owned soft serve machines in the Chicago area anomalously producing a, quote, salty black goop, unquote, when used regardless of what substance they were loaded with, and the substance itself is confirmed by chemical analysis to be edible and non-anomalous, consisting primarily of yeast extract and salt. But despite being harmless, the anomalous matter in which the substance is created represents a breach of normalcy, necessitating confiscation of the machines. And a day later, we have our first reported case of black substance being produced by soft serve machines outside the state of Illinois. This continues to spread. We release the -1 from custody in an attempt to prevent or possibly reverse the ongoing anomalous effects. It does not. And I want to call out this next line. I want to pick it apart just a touch. The next line, this is a day after the previous log. Foundation Assets managed to force a recall of soft serve machines in the United States on the basis of hygiene concerns. One of the things that I like to point out when you can and when it makes sense in the work is to let the Foundation flex. What I would like to drop the words "managed to" from this. Just on the basis of that we are then apparently have the power to unilaterally do this. Foundation Assets force a recall of soft serve machines in the United States. That's something I think I would like just a touch more, and maybe that's obviously personal preference, but the managed to is also not quite the right tone either. So if you want to not make it such a strong foundation, I still don't think managed to is quite the phrase to use. I think there would be something else to better go there. In any event, so the day after that, after forcing the recall, we have our first reported cases of black substance being produced by soft serve machines outside of the U.S. We have an MTF commissioned by the O5 Council. This is MTF Lambda 18, Hamburglers Helpers. It begins embedding in all as yet unaffected restaurants in anticipation of further spread of anomalous behavior, and this MTF proves effective at sabotaging soft serve machines before they begin exhibiting anomalous properties, but is unable to keep up with the rate of spread. I really wanted this to be like a long-term explanation of why the damn ice cream machines at McDonald's are always broken, but we only got it for a little bit. I really wanted this to be a bigger part of the work, but it wasn't. But that's okay. It wasn't. We didn't really have to have it. Anyway, Foundation Assets 2 days later. Again, here's this managed to force a global recall of all soft serve machines owned by the McDonald's Corporation. And 3 days later, the last known soft serve machine not exhibiting anomalous behavior begins producing a black substance. This is the state of things for, it looks like, 2 weeks, and then a new instance of -1 noted to have a different skin tone, hair color, and substantially less acne than the previous instance manifests at Site 4155 and is allowed to complete its task. A day later, confiscated soft serve machines begin returning to non-anomalous operation. 3 days pass, and the last reported case of a confiscated soft serve machine behaving in an anomalous manner. After 5 more days, the recall is lifted, confiscated machines are returned to the manufacturer, and our MTF is disbanded. And in total, this incident necessitated Foundation Assets embedded in 7,500 restaurants and the recall, confiscation, or sabotage of more than 22,000 soft serve machines worldwide. McDonald's employees who demonstrated excessive interest in the anomaly, 11 in total, were detained and amnesticized. End article. So overall, I like the work. I have a couple of things I don't personally care for, but those are personal preference sort of things. There's nothing really wrong with the piece. The tone is pretty good throughout. The dialogue is well constructed, and all of that. Like going back to the beginning, like this is a really weird thing, right? We've got hairless cats that are apparently the source of all of the ice cream that McDonald's uses. I'm I like it as a premise. Like it's one of these like there every so often you'll have one of these works that's going to cross over into your day to day. Now, I'm lactose intolerant, so it's like I'm not going to be it's not going to happen all that often, but I'm going to see the ice cream machine if I'm at a McDonald's and I'm going to think of this. I'm going to think of this picture, and you should look at this. You should go pull up the skip SCP-4155 and see this picture of this poor little eyeless, hairless cat, and you're going to think about that every time you are standing in line at a McDonald's and see that soft serve machine. On that basis, on the sticks with you factor, this is an easy +1. Moving on, SCP-4843 titled Take It With Me When I Go, and this was written by Rock Teeth Moth Eyes. We have no images in the work at all. In fact, this is a rather short work. It fits entirely on the above the fold of my monitor. We have an object class of safe and short procedures. The skip is currently buried 24 meters underground in its original gravesite at Aspen Grove Cemetery in Burlington, Iowa. The disappearance of the Essermink family has been explained by Cover Story 109 Witness Protection, and family members not found within 4843 have been amnesticized. So, buried family members not found within it. Okay, like there's a little bit going on right off the bat here, and that's the entirety of the procedures. Probably because it is a safe class skip, there's not a lot of actual containment that needs doing at this point. 4843 is described as the coffin of a Gerald Essermink, a drag racing enthusiast interred in Burlington, Iowa. 4843 is surrounded by a tough shell estimated to be 18 meters in diameter. That's a big shell. This shell is composed of organic and non-organic materials divided between 5 distinct layers, and it restores any displaced mass after a period of 4 days. The restored materials are identical each regeneration, and we have a description, a little table of the shell surrounding the skip layer by layer. At the outermost layer, it's a combination of wood, glass, electrical wire, brick, and carpet, approximately 12 meters in depth. Inside that, a combination of metal and rubber, as well as painted fiberglass. This is approximately 3 meters in depth. Inside of that, the miscellaneous racing paraphernalia. This includes model cars, flags, photographs, and video games. This is approximately 1 meter in depth. At the innermost layer, several corpses ranging from ages 10 to 90 in various stages of decomposition, and studies have indicated these corpses are in stasis. They do not decompose any further. This is approximately 2 meters in depth, and at the core is SCP-4843, the coffin, and inside contains the body of Mr. Essermink and several photos. These photos depict the Mr. Essermink in various tourist locations and speedways, as well as with his spouse and grandchildren. We have a footnote here that says, investigation into his personal life indicates this was specifically stipulated in his will. And we have a discovery log that the skip gained its anomalous properties 1 week after Mr. Essermink was buried. At this time, the shell began to rapidly form around it, disrupting the surrounding graves in the cemetery and attracting the attention of the Foundation. We began containment protocols immediately to hide the skip from public view, while we also held a disinformation campaign citywide. Due to its massive size, we could not locate it anywhere else discreetly. Thus, we made the call to bury it further in the cemetery. According to multiple civilians and witnesses, numerous direct relatives of Mr. Essermink suddenly disappeared around the same time as 4843's emergence, as well as 3 race cars and a cabin personally built by Mr. Essermink. End article. So, this is saying more with less. The simple, I think correct interpretation of this is the skip is basically it's pulling in the things that it considered closest to it, starting at the outside with the house, and at the inside, family members. So we don't explain how this came to pass. We don't know. Does it really matter? Well, probably, but we don't always get what we want, do we? I like it on that premise that they never had to really come out and say that, but we had, a disappearance, a house, 3 race cars, and numerous direct relatives. So this is well done for being a short work. I believe the shortest work of the week, maybe the shortest work in a few weeks. This is really concise. The tone is perfect. I don't see a thing wrong with it. Really deserving of its rating right now, which is at plus 42 at the time of recording. Very easy, short work, easy +1 from me. Moving on, and maybe I spoke too soon because this thing looks to be every bit as short as the work right before. SCP-4759, titled The Challenger of Donut Taxes. This was written by Werillium. We have an image. It's of a donut. It appears to be a glazed donut. Subtitle reads, A Donut, recovered from SCP-4759-A. We have an object class of Keter. It's a donut. We have... Okay. So we have short procedures here. Foundation elements and state governments are to monitor for 4759 manifestations and discredit it during deliberations. Donut shops in affected areas are to be surveilled for the -A. And as of 3/10/2017, again with these date formats, as of 3/10/2017, state legislators are to be investigated for any connections to bakeries and bread distributors. All right, fine. The description indicates the skip is the reference to anomalous additions to existing bills being considered by state legislatures. These instances are between 10 and 120,000 words and consist almost entirely of nonsense words and phrases, with the exception of a single section that describes a donut tax in great detail and specificity. This proposed bill imposes a sales tax of 10 to 90% on all donuts and related food items and products, as well as a heavier tax on the overall profits of small businesses which sell donuts. And legislators reviewing the skip will regard the document as non-anomalous and discuss the tax as they would any other. Legislators in support of this donut tax will suffer insomnia, persistent nightmares, and develop a severe flour allergy. Dun dun dun. Occasionally, a legislator that supports the tax will be accosted by a figure designated -A. It resembles a humanoid armed with a lance mounted on a horse, composed entirely of compressed donuts. Local stores report the sudden disappearance of large amounts of donuts during -A manifestations. It will vocalize through unknown means, challenge the legislator to single combat, with the condition that should -A win, the legislator must attempt to stop the passing of 4759, the donut tax. This is what was the title of this? Oh, the Challenger of Donut Taxes. Right. If the legislator declines, the -A will continue to appear every day until they acquiesce. To date, the combined actions of the Foundation and the -A have managed to prevent any donut taxes from being passed into law. We have an addendum here on 3/9/2017. When's that? I don't know. -A attempted to battle Alabama Senator Vivian Davis Figures due to the latter's extremely vocal support for the bill. Upon being struck by -A's lance, Senator Figures' skin was pierced. She removed it and revealed herself to be composed entirely of bagels. Senator Figures won the duel and fled the scene, has not been located since. -A has continued its appearances. End article. I don't know how you come up with this shit. I really don't. You could give me a freaking 6 months off work and tell me to write, just write skips all day for 6 months, I would never come up with something like this. And it's my favorite thing about the wiki, really, is seeing all of the different minds and thought processes at work, because it wouldn't have come from me, but I like it. What the hell? I do. I enjoy it. It's this like weird fever dream sort of thing. Like, I don't know if it's a skip or a fever dream, but I like it in either case. It's simple. The tone is really good. It has enough what the fuckery to it that I think you'll turn it over in your head for a while. And yeah, not the longest work in the world. I think this actually is shorter by at least by size on the page than the previous work, but that's fine. The thing's at plus 50. So it's doing something right, and I think it's doing something right as well. This is a +1 from me. Moving on. SCP-4805, this is titled Utilitarian, and this was written by Many Meats. We have the new SCP theme in play, and I'm told at this point it is no longer called New SCP. That's reasonable. It is now called Black Highlighter. We have no images anywhere in this work, which is quite a bit longer than the previous two. We have an object class of Euclid and a actually very short set of procedures given the overall length of the piece. The mall containing 4805 has been purchased by the Foundation and closed to the public. We have a provisional Site 71 constructed within the mall and surrounding the skip. This site is intended to contain the greatest number of instances of -1 as safely allowed. As -1 instances are not otherwise anomalous, the use of group housing and barrack-style bedding has been approved for implementation. Preliminary facility plans have been submitted, and we have a strike through here, and what struck through reads, and are waiting for review by administration. And then we have an update, a containment update that says the Ethics Committee has assumed oversight of Provisional Site 71, and plans for expansion are pending their direct review. See Addendum 5 for additional details. 4805 is described as a temporal anomaly and associated spatial phenomenon located in the Fox River Valley of Wisconsin. The effect is centered on the employee break room located in a now-defunct retail chain and does not appear to influence spacetime beyond the boundaries of this room. It is a Class 2 temporal anomaly, which we go on to explain as having a repeating event without any discernible cause. And despite the nature of this event, the process does not appear to require any input from outside forces and is yet to be altered by any outside influences. The spatial anomaly associated with the skip has so far prevented any and all matter, sound, and light from entering the internal space of the skip, as well as not allowing any matter to leave the room. Lights and sounds generated are observable from the exterior, and at this time it's unknown how the room continues to receive power and oxygen. The primary subject of the anomaly has been designated as -1. We have identified this -1 as a Royce Dean Lee, a resident of Madison, Wisconsin, that was reported missing in 2012. Foundation resources have been unable to locate a match for the subject outside of the anomaly. The missing persons report is considered cold by police. Every 8 hours, a new -1 materializes in the open doorway on the north wall of the room, apparently unaware of his travel. These -1 instances universally demonstrate confusion, denial, and aggression within the opening minutes and hours of their appearance as they attempt to exit the room, and to date, no effective means to leave the anomaly have been discovered. No additional anomalous activity has been observed within the boundaries of the skip other than the events which generate additional -1 instances. So we have, that's the description. A temporal loop, if you will, that is causing the same guy to keep showing up in a room, and we can have apparently an arbitrarily large number of these given the procedures that indicate that we have like group housing and barrack-style bedding and so on. We go to a discovery log in 2019, and we apparently had a police call out that they found a lot of squatters sitting in a defunct portion of the mall. The police responded in confusion. They were seeing lots of identical twins, and they were unable to communicate with the squatters or physically get to them. Now, get to them is a strange phrase here. I think I might prefer physically interact with them. Get to them, I think the tone is a little flat there. Foundation Assets secured the area, amnestized the first responders, supplied cover stories indicating that we successfully dispersed the squatters. Provisional Assets secure the site. While this is going on, we observe additional -1 instances generating over the following 48 hours. Conditions within the room deteriorate physically. Human waste begins to accumulate. The subjects begin deteriorating emotionally and mentally while exhibiting signs of increased aggression and confrontational tendencies. We have the rest of this through incident logs, notes, and addendums. So we have our first incident that we began the establishment of this provisional Site 71 3 days after discovery. We documented and recorded the anomaly. We find additional instances of -1 appearing at regular intervals. The interior of the room remains dimensionally unchanged. And by the third day, these -1 instances were forced to stand in extreme proximity and in near silence as they developed a system for rotating sleeping space still available on a break room couch. It's really gnarly stuff. Like these guys just packed into a room. I'm not entirely clear on how this was working. I guess this is like we're building the site so they have somewhere to go, but the skip was also indicating that they can't really leave. So I'm not 100% clear on how these things are interacting, but what I do know is that we've got so many of these instances that they are in really tight quarters, to say the least. And during the early hours of the next day, one more -1 shows up, and one of the previous iterations experienced what's believed to have been a psychological break. It grabbed the leg off of an overturned break room table, stabbed the latest iteration in the chest with the jagged end before being restrained. There was no medical expertise or equipment available, so the new -1 retreated into a corner until they eventually lost consciousness due to blood loss, and thereafter it dematerialized. And this was observed both by us as well as the surviving iterations of -1. The -1s began debating punishment for the transgression, and shortly thereafter intense violence was observed as the survivors began to restrain, wrestle, and otherwise fight each other. The inevitable result was the incapacitation and deaths of progressive numbers of -1 until only 4 remained. Each instance dematerialized as they died, along with all evidence of their presence. So we go from there to our second incident log. That's quite an incident all on its own. 1 day later, at the genesis of another -1 instance, the surviving instances surrounded, restrained, and subdued the new instance, utilizing a chokehold until it became unconscious. The -1s that were still conscious were talking amongst themselves, asking whether it would dematerialize. It did not, and they made the decision to terminate this instance before the arrival of the next. Same day, new incident log. The next iteration was spawned, addressed by the surviving group. The survivors assisted the new iteration through the stages of grief. All 5 instances began to discuss what they'd learned, an alternative means of contacting the outside world. They all appear to be aware of the repeating nature of the anomaly and voted to terminate any new instance upon its creation. The top of the next cycle, the 5 survivors surrounded, restrained, and terminated the new -1 instance. Now, if we want to really sort of poke the bear here, really amp up the horror factor, given that this is going on in a break room, I feel like you could get fairly graphic in how they're going about this termination. I think it would maybe do a little bit more for this piece. Um, but the cold clinicalness is fine, but normally there's multiple parties reading these skips, maybe especially since the ethics committee is already involved in it. They're going to take how these skips are interacting with each other and what sort of things they do into consideration when they make their decisions. So it's a consideration. This piece is doing pretty well, so it doesn't really matter what I think here. But anyway, we repeat this process 3 more times. The subjects began to seriously evaluate the status of their food and water, as well as the persistent accumulation of their own bodily waste. So there's some real like claustrophobia, like there's some serious fears being played on here, and I really like that about this piece. 3 days pass. We have several more iterations of the above pattern. One of the surviving -1s asked to be terminated instead. They began debating amongst themselves about what it means to be Royce, and this was interrupted by the Next Genesis event, and at this time, one of the -1s handed a jagged table leg to another instance and allowed himself to be terminated, whereupon he promptly demanifested. So maybe that's good enough. We did talk about that table leg, and we have a cause and effect there, and you can kind of fill in the blanks, which may be better than anything that you could write down. So maybe that's fine. As of the 2 days after that, the -1s have self-regulated between 3 and 5 active instances. Finally, we have a letter from the ethics committee, and it indicates that as of this point in time, the committee's decided no effort should be made to breach or interrupt the effective self-containment of 4805 without a change in circumstances. The theoretical loss of life is questionable, but there are serious implications raised by failure to contain the skip. If we do effectively breach the anomaly, keeping the room physically contained, we would be producing a theoretically limitless number of -1s, for which we would be ethically and morally responsible for feeding, clothing, housing, and otherwise keeping well. Without any means to prevent additional instances from generating, this burden would quickly become overwhelming. A number of alternatives exist to deal with -1s, but none of them are cleared as ethically permissible within this context. Due to the genetic and physical makeup of these individuals, we cannot really release them into the general population with a cover story, even with extreme coordination. And the list of options gets far worse from there. So at this time, research should be focused solely on the identification and neutralization of the anomaly responsible for generating copies of the subject. Our compassion must be tempered with logic. End article. So I've said it before, I really like when we get into Foundation ethics. I feel like that's a natural place to take the work. And in this case, it already plays on a lot of existential fears, and then having the ethics committee jump in and indicate that, we're going to leave it alone. We are basically washing our hands of the situation because the alternatives are not palatable to the Foundation. It's, the ethics committee lives in a very, very, very gray world, and I like that about this piece, that it really does accentuate that. So all that said, the piece is good. It has a couple of little, quirks here and there, but some of those things are, my personal taste. I will say I find this piece to be highly underrated. It is currently at +12. It's not that old. I think it's only about a day old at this point, but this is well done. I mean, I've admitted I'm a sucker for Foundation ethics in the first place, so, you can always take my interpretations with a grain of salt, but I really like this piece. I think it did what it set out to do fairly well. I am not 100% clear on how things interact. We've kind of indicated in the beginning that we can't really interact with them. They can't really interact with us, and it doesn't really explain how a number of these little things work. Is it perhaps maybe it might be that this anomaly, these dash ones can leave within a certain area. They're not entirely confined to this break room. They just always come through this one door, and from there they can work within and exist within a slightly larger area. And perhaps that's what's going on here. That makes the most sense out of anything else I can think of. But it's not 100% clear that that's what's going on. I'm after thinking about it, I'm pretty sure that is what's going on, but it's not super clear. And maybe it's because I'm so used to us doing this sort of you can see them but they can't see you thing, and it's confined to a very tight space. So yeah, that's all okay. I like the work. I like anything that deals in Foundation ethics and where we have these really questionable but at least marginally defensible verdicts that we make on these actions. So this is a good piece and an easy +1. Now, before we get into the last skip of the week, I want to talk about the long boy of the week. This is SCP-4519, titled Carl Sagan, Godhead, and this was a co-write between 9volt and Floppy Phoenix. This is part of IntCon, which is still going on. We have the GOI in use here is Sapphire from the French wiki, and this is basically a terrorist group that aims to bring an end to any sort of theism, any sort of belief in religion. And I think that's a really cool GOI. It's one we don't really have a direct comparison to on the English wiki, and I think we could do a lot with it. This is one of the things that I really enjoy about IntCon, is that we get to use some of these for the first time and see expose them to other writers, and then let the hive mind kind of get to work on using it in a number of ways. So this piece, I don't want to get into the entire thing. It is a long boy, but the gist of it is that it pertains to the disembodied head of Carl Sagan, which Futurama did first, and how Carl Sagan may have very well been not of this earth. In fact, when his body was apprehended by Sapphire and they began to prep it for removing the head and basically work with it and be able to interact with it and communicate with it, we find that Carl Sagan was perhaps more akin to a god, as even the dead body still had life as it could be experienced through these psionic Sapphire agents. There's an internal memo in this piece of one of the leaders of Sapphire to another that asking why the corpse still has life in it. And I don't simply mean the mind and logic, a life. When we woke him, we were not greeted by statements of universal truth. Instead, there were screams about why his vision looked like kaleidoscopes, why his body was numb, why his mouth tasted copper. He panicked further when I told him of our organization's goals. I had to cover my ears when we lopped off the core of intellect from the body. I had to squeeze even harder when the lungs lost connection. This is a really outstanding piece, and I don't want to spoil a thing. It's quite long and is worthy of your time. End to end, lot going on. Take your time, read through it. It's an outstanding piece. Now, last but not least, SCP-4127, titled Heads or Tails, written by the Great Hippo. So this has been an interesting week. A lot of these authors that we covered this week are, actually every one of them, are authors that I've covered in the past. That might actually be the first time on one of these shows that I've had all 5 be returning members, and you can even include the Long Boy. That's 7 authors for 6 pieces, and every one of them has been featured at least once. That's pretty cool too, I think. In any event, we have an image. It is looks like a dime. The text says otherwise, but it looks like, oh, I get, so this was supposed to be a buffalo nickel. It's been etched away. I've seen people do this with different pieces of silver coins and so on, where they change the overall look of it by etching away certain parts. And this is began as a buffalo nickel and now looks closer to a dime, but with a human skull and a just visible piece of the spinal cord attached. It's honestly pretty cool looking, honestly. We have an object class of neutralized. It's interesting. The skip is the coin, apparently, and the caption reads SCP-4127 prior to neutralization. We have minimal procedures here. The skip is to be kept on site in a secure, low-risk containment vault. Additional testing is prohibited at this time. That's all of it. It's described as a 1936 USA buffalo nickel that depicts a buffalo on one side and a human skull on the other. When flipped, the skip always lands head side up. As a matter of fact, this comes from the log of anomalous items. This was pulled from that and turned into its own work. I always dig that when people see a thing and they're like, I'm going to make that a skip. There's, they had the item, but they missed what you could do with it. So here's what we did with it. This was a coin that always flipped heads, but we found a secondary effect of this piece. Whenever the coin is flipped after the subject describes an event conditional upon the flip, the result will determine the event's outcome. So this was found when a janitor that is tasked with performing routine maintenance did his thing, flipped the coin, and while he was flipping it said, "Heads, I get a promotion." So he was called to the site director's office to receive a promotion for his conduct. During the meeting, he mentions having flipped the coin only minutes prior, and given that his honesty is what led to the skip's discovery, the promotion is upheld. That's nice. So we have a few of these where we say, heads, my quarter's next flip will come up tails, and that happens on a non-anomalous quarter. We then say heads, the next 10 flips with my quarter will come up tails, and this also happens. Now, if you know your powers of 2 to the 10th is 1,024, you have a 1 in 1,024 odds of this happening. Pretty good. We then say tails, my quarter will come up tails at least once in the next 10 flips, and it comes up heads every time. Then things get a little problematic. We say heads, my quarter will now always come up tails. And the result of this is that our formerly non-anomalous quarter is now anomalous, and it's been added to the list of anomalous objects. We have a note from the site director that says, don't do this again. So we expand out a little bit. It says heads, I'll get a call in the next 5 seconds, and the result is heads, and the outcome is that the researcher immediately receives a call from his wife, reminding him to pick up their son from school. We have another one, heads, I'll get a call from the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes in the next 5 seconds. And he does. During the ensuing conversation, it becomes clear the committee member dialed the wrong number. Then we try heads, I'll become filthy rich. And the result is heads, and at this time, a sewage main bursts in the bathroom, flooding the lab with raw excrement, and shortly thereafter, researcher Rogers receives a phone call from an investigator hired by his biological mother. During the ensuing conversation, he's informed that his birth name is Richard. So heads, I'll become filthy rich. We got some monkey's paw shit going on here. And I pitched this one in the channel that we were going to talk about it, and one of the members, this actually was Mini Meat, basically said that it was like an old forum, corrupt a wish above you chain, which I think is dead on. Last but not least, out of these statements, we go heads, this flip comes up tails. The result is tails. This thing has never come up tails before. The problem is, now both sides of the skip are tails. All anomalous properties cease, it's redesignated as neutralized. And note, on account of his misuse of an anomaly for monetary gain, researcher Rogers is hereby demoted to janitorial staff. End article. So there's a little bit more going on here than a simple test log, and it's not remotely obvious. If you refresh the page, you have a 50-50 chance of an entirely different piece. This piece it's also a skull, but this is a quarter that depicts an eagle on one side and a human skull on the other, and when flipped, this one always lands tails. And what we have happen is they have a nickel that they're testing with, and we have a janitor that is a janitor Rogers, whereas in the previous one we had a janitor Rodriguez. And basically what's happening with these two is that they are the mirror images of their results. The alternate version ends that researcher Rodriguez is hereby demoted to janitorial staff. In the first one I said researcher Rogers is hereby demoted to janitorial staff, and it begins with either a janitor Rogers or janitor Rodriguez, depending on which version you get. So this is, if you have seen this concept before, I can only think of it in one other piece, and that is SCP-1173, which is where the depending on which version you load, and that was a little more obvious because it did, I think, actually mention that you could reload the page right at the beginning to get an alternate version. But I'm a fan of that, when we get these sort of random articles by chance, but it is something when you present it in this way, it's tricky to convey and be sure that everybody got to see both sides of it. So this was cool just on the premise of the format screw, as well as being well put together. This had a nice little Series 1 feel. It did feel like something that, without the screw, you could say, yeah, that's more of an anomalous item than something that needed a whole skip done after it. But when you bring it into this format, I think it's a really good way to go about it. On that basis, and the fact that it's just a fine skip, this is +1 for me. That brings the thing to +70, making it the high skip of the week as well. And with that, we're going to call it a show. We're out of here in a hurry. We're at 52 minutes or so. I have nothing else to say on the subject. We're out of here. Enjoy your holiday weekend. I think most of you got some time off. Week 17 will be on the 26th. That's my plan for now. So I'll see you next week. Until then, keep reading, keep writing. I'll see you on the other side.